Hi everyone and welcome back to CodeNodes. In our previous video, we have covered the introduction to function, why it is important and why should we use it, and types of functions in C++. In today's video, we are gonna write actual function program in C++. Now let's start with the syntax of the function. So this is the general syntax of the function. Just like the variable declaration and definition, functions do have declaration and definition. The declaration syntax is that we specify the return type. The return type could be any data type. It could be integer, float, or double, etc. Then goes the function name. Function name will be of our choice. We name the function based on the operation we are performing. For example, if we are performing the addition operation inside the function, then we may name the function name as addition of two numbers, for example. And inside the parenthesis goes the parameters list. The parameters are the inputs that the function takes, and the declaration ends with the semicolon, and then the definition of the function. It is same as the declaration. The first line, the return type, function name, and the parameter lists are exactly the declaration. And one thing that is added to here is the braces and the body of the function. Inside the braces, we write the operation that the function is performing, and it may return the result, and the return result is optional because some functions do not return the result. We will understand it when we move forward. Now let's look at the example. Here you can see we have put two examples as per the syntax. Now as you can see, the integer type is the return type of this function. It means that this function will return an integer type value. The result we are returning, this will be integer type. And we have specified the function name as add two numbers, which is very clear to user. Without looking into the implementation of this function, the user can easily understand by the function name that this function is performing addition of the two numbers. And inside the parenthesis, there are parameters this function take as an input. The parameters are like this, num1 and num2. We should also define the integer type of the variables we are taking as an input. We are taking two inputs, num1 and num2, and both of them are integer data type. And after performing a calculation inside the function, we are storing the addition of num1 and num2 into a result variable, which is again integer type, and then we are returning this result. Same we have taken another example, and here you can see we use the float data type as the return type of this function, and the function name is very clear, multiply two numbers, and we are taking parameters of float this time, first and second. These are the variables and the data types of these variables are float, and again we are performing a calculation of multiplication, and then we are returning the value, and the data type of this returning value will be float. Now, what happens if we do not want to return a value and we do not want to specify any data type of the function? Then we use the void. The function return type, we use void. It indicates the absence of a specific data type. For example, we do not want to use integer, float, or double, etc. Then we should use void. When we use void as a return type of the function, then it doesn't return anything. We just print that inside the function and it does not return anything. As in the examples you can see, print my age is taking age as a parameter, and it is just printing the age inside its body. And we have defined another function which is say hello, and it is not taking any parameter and it is just printing hello. The one thing more is that the function can take none of the variable as a parameter, and it can take many parameters as input. Now, once we declared and defined the function, then we need to use it in our program. So do that, we call that function in our main program. For example, we have in previous slide, we declared and defined a function add two numbers, and that was taking two parameters. So we call this function in our main function, and then we pass these numbers to that function. and we are storing the value in my variable. And samely, the say hello and print my age function. The say hello program function was not taking any parameter, just like here you can see. So we have not passed any argument to this function. And the print my age was taking only one parameter, age. So we are just printing one value 25 to it. And the multiply two nums, it was taking two parameters. So we have passed two values to it. The overall flow of the execution of the function is that we call the function inside main function. Inside the main function, it calls and then execute the function, and then the function returns a value, and the process continues like this. Now there is one thing that is very confusing, that is parameters versus arguments. Parameter is that we use during the function declaration and definition. For example, in here you can see that during the declaration of the function we have used int num1 and num2. These are called parameters. While the arguments is that when we call this function and we are passing the values to it, those are called arguments. For example, in here we are calling that function and we are passing two values to this function. So these are called arguments. Now let's move to the code editor and write some program to understand the functions better. Alright, now let's write some function in C++ to understand it better. Now let's start with the declaration of the function. So declaration, first we are going to specify the return type, which is I am going to use integer, and the function name I am going to use add because I want the function to perform the addition. And the parameters I am going to take is integer a and integer data type b. I am going to take two values as a parameter. So this is the declaration of the function. It is also called prototype. The definition of the function is the extended version of the declaration and where we are going to implement the body of that function. So in here I am going to take another variable c, and in this c I am going to store the value of a plus b. And what I am going to do is that return c. So first is declaration, the second step is to define it, definition, and the third we are going to call this function inside our program. So for that, let me declare a variable int value, and inside this I am going to store the result the add function will return. So for the add function I am going to pass two arguments of data type integer. So I am going to just pass 4 and 5, and let's print this value. The result is value and handle. If I compile this with G++ function cpp, so it will produce an exe file of a.exe. So if I run this a.exe, so now you can see that it has printed a value of 9, which is the correct result. 5 plus 4, which is 9. You can also just use this inside here in the cout statement, and this will give the same result, and it is syntactically correct. So if I compile this and run it, it has printed 9. Now let's understand the importance of the declaration of the function. The declaration of the function is important if we are defining the definition of the function after the main program or in another file. For example, if we just cut this and we are defining the function after the main function, so in that case this is necessary, because in C++ the program executes sequentially, and after executing up to this main function, if the function does not get this add function in here any part, so it will not execute this and it will throw an error. For example, if I comment this and save it, now if I again compile this Now you can see it has thrown an error that 8 was not declared in this scope. So if I just uncomment this, and now this time if I recompile again, now as you can see this time 8 has not thrown any error, and if we run this it has printed the value. So the declaration is necessary if you are using the definitions after the main function. So for my convention I am just using these definitions before the main function, so we do not need this declaration for now, as it is already declared before executing the main function. As you can see, if I compile this and run this, now it has worked perfectly. So we will just skip the declaration of the function, as I am used to declare the functions above the main functions. Let's create one more function, and I am going to use this time the return type as float, and we are going to name the function as mult for multiplication of two numbers, and in the parameter I am going to take one variable as a data type of integer, and the second one is as float and b. And this time I am going to again store it in C. Let use it as a float. C is equal to a multiplied by b, and I am going to return it as return C. Now for your own convention, I am just going to skip this float, storing it in another variable, and just going to return here a multiplied by b. So it will just return the result, which will be of data type float. Now in here I am just going to copy this line, paste below, and the result of mult is, and here I am going to use the function name mult, and the value we are going to given is that 1 is integer type, so 4 is okay, and for float I am just going to give it 5.2. So if I compile this and run it, now as you can see it has printed the result is 20.8. So 4 multiplied by 5.2 is 20.8, which is correct answer. The second thing you need to understand is that when the return type is defined any of the data type, then you must return the value. If I just comment it and if we are not returning anything, and now if I compile this, now you can see it has thrown any error in the int add function where we are not returning any statement. So it has printed warning that no return statement in any function, returning non-void. So if the function is non-void function, it must return a value. So if I again compile this and run this, now as you can see it has worked perfectly. Now let's see an example of a void function where we do not need to return any value. So for that, let me just clear these comments for getting some space. And the function we are going to define is that void and say hello, and in this function we are just going to print cout this is x, and just going to print this. Now for your understanding, in here we are going to take one variable int b, and inside this b we are going to store a value of 8, and we are going to return b. Let's check if this works correctly or not. Since the return type is void, it will not return the value. So it has already shown me an error over here in the problems. If we can see that return value type doesn't match the function type. So in the void function we cannot return any value. So let me just remove this. First of all, let's call this function. Since we are already using the print statement in the function, we will just call say hello function over here, and if I compile this function file and then I run it, now as you can see it has printed this is x. So when you want the function to return a value, you must specify the return type as the float, integer or any data type, and when the function return type is not necessary, we just use the void statement here. So this is the general overview of function we saw in slides and implement some of the examples. And in our next video, we are going to further explore the functions in C++. And this is it for today's video. If you find it helpful, give it a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe to CodeNodes. Thank you for watching.